All right. Hello, everybody joining us live on Facebook this afternoon. I'm Karen Lair with Idaho News 6. And today we're going to be talking about the very important topic of Alzheimer's. It impacts so many Idahoans and Americans and people all around the world. So I know some of you out there may be impacted by this personally, and we hope to hear your stories as well. As we get through this conversation this afternoon, you can chime in the comment section, ask your questions, and we'll try to answer those live for you as well. So I'll introduce you to the other faces you see on screen right now. We have Dr. Amy Kahn with Regence joining us, and we have Adrienne Kavanagh with the Alzheimer's Association here in Idaho. So before we kind of get into research and what's out there, let's go ahead and break down what Alzheimer's is. It's a term that we hear a lot, but as far as what it actually means for the physical body, what it does, how many people are impacted, let's start there. So Dr. Kahn, what is Alzheimer's?
Sure, Karen, and thank you for having us today. Look forward to our conversation. First off, Alzheimer refers to a type of dementia. Dementia is really generally considered a set of thinking and social symptoms that interfere with daily functioning. So it does tend to be a progressive disease characterized by memory loss and cognitive or thinking decline that interferes with daily activities. About 60 to 80% of persons with dementia have Alzheimer's disease.
Okay. And is there like a wide range of severity, or does it progress
Indeed.
over time? Can it start with just a little something that you may think, something's starting to get a little off?
That's right. Yeah, it is a progressive condition, right? And so there might be a few early symptoms, and that we'll be talking a lot more about that.
Mhm.
And then over time, it does progress for some people more rapidly than others. I think a couple things to keep in mind for the viewers is that as of 2020, there were 27,000 Idahoans aged 65 and over that had Alzheimer's disease. And that number is expected to increase of over 20% to over 33,000 by 2025. Now, we also know that women are about 40% more likely to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's than men, but in part, that's because men will die sooner from other causes, things
Hmm.
like chronic diseases, heart disease, if you will. Now, the cause exactly of Alzheimer's disease is still unknown, and it's likely due to multiple risk factors. And we don't yet have a cure. However, there are very good data and evidence to indicate that we can slow down that progression of the disease. So, people early on, say, Karen, who start with maybe minor symptoms, if we intervene sooner, we can slow that progression. But this is an area of much ongoing research.
And we're getting some viewers chiming in right now. Kathy saying her mother is in severe stages of Alzheimer's. So we're sorry to hear that, Kathy. You're certainly not alone. And Tina is chiming in saying there are over 400 different types of dementia. So maybe we can differentiate what is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? We hear the terms sometimes interchangeably, but they're not the same thing.
That's right. Like I said, Alzheimer represents the largest proportion of a category of conditions that we call dementia. Dementia again has to do with that thinking and social progressive disease that's a neurologic, right? And
Hmm.
keep in mind there are multiple different kinds of dementia: Lewy body dementia, multi-infarct dementia. There are others, some in which we don't again, know exactly the cause. Sometimes there is a hereditary pattern, rarely, fortunately, in some of the types of dementia. But the key is to monitor for early signs, recognizing that, all of us are occasionally, forgetful or, might have what we feel like a little slippage. That's not dementia. We're talking about something that is consistent, is recurrent, and usually found to be continuing to expand into other aspects of people's life. For example, some of the early signs of Alzheimer's include, memory loss that is now, starting to disrupt daily life. We also know that these individuals start having trouble with things like planning, problem solving, handling money. Maybe they've lost money, or they, maybe have been using poor judgment in terms of how they're managing money. tasks that have been, familiar or common, really, something that a person normally would be able to do, suddenly become a little bit more difficult. And that can include tasks at home, such as operating the oven or microwave, or or even things at work, suddenly not remembering how to use the computer, or maybe engaging in even just leisure time activities. Persons who start to have Alzheimer's and other kinds of dementia, will commonly have issues with some confusion, maybe of time, space, place. They don't recognize things that had been familiar to them in the past, or even individuals, that they've known forever, and then suddenly, like, now who is that person, right? What we see typically is that there may be, as the disease progresses, more difficulty with things like balance. People may start stumbling a little bit. Certainly, we hear, folks that, maybe get confused when they're driving, they've gotten lost, or maybe start having things like benders, right? Backing into things perhaps just a little less aware. And I'm
Hmm.
sure that Adrian has some additional, comments on this. I've talked a little bit about, the kinds of dementia, and in particular Alzheimer's, and what things to look out for in terms of signs. But I'm sure, Adrian, you have additional thoughts to offer at this point.
Yeah, Adrian, we've got someone
Yeah.
chiming in here in the comments as well that in Kathy's experience, Alzheimer's doesn't look the same for everyone. So, what would you like to say on that as far as what signs to look for in people?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Khan. For, like, that's a pretty extensive list of things to look for. From our perspective, it almost always is noticed by the primary caregiver first. So the person that you live with, that is in the closest proximity to you, because they're the ones that notice those slight differences before anyone else.
Hmm.
And it usually sounds something like something's off, like something is amiss. And like Dr. Khan said, again, as we age, we will lose our keys more. Like that will happen. And we will start to forget names, and we will forget appointments. Um, but it's something beyond the normal aging. For What brought me to the Alzheimer's Association is I lost my dad about 5 years ago to the disease. And what started with my mom is she said, he's starting to sleep like a lot, like not normal. And we didn't see that the kids, we didn't see that every day. And so
Hmm.
typically the kind of the genesis of this is the person that lives with them every day will say something to the effect of something is off, like something is seriously amiss. And when that happens, as somebody that is around the caregiver, try not to dismiss that and dig deeper. And that's when we start looking at the signs and symptoms that Dr. Khan outlined before.
Now, Adrian, as so much has changed in the last 18 months, are you seeing or hearing from, Idahoans here that maybe they're not catching some of those signs because they're not getting to be around dad or grandpa or grandma as much? And so when they maybe do see them, it's kind of a little more apparent. Are you seeing any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. We're also seeing a lot of just caregiver isolation, right? This
Hmm.
disease is inherently stigmatized and isolating to begin with.
Yeah.
And then you layer on top of that a literal like stay at home order, and it can be very, very difficult. And so, yeah, so for your elder loved ones that are at home, that are, living on their own, we certainly have heard stories. And I don't think that there's a good way to quantify, what that effect is. But we know that COVID has had a significant impact on those with dementia.
Definitely. Now, as far as talking about, quantifying in our area here, Adrian, how many people in Idaho are impacted by Alzheimer's or are living with Alzheimer's or caring for someone with Alzheimer's? What do we know about how many people out there are dealing with this every day?
Yeah. So as Dr. Khan said earlier, we have about 27,000 individuals with Alzheimer's. And Dr. Khan, I don't know if you would agree with this statement, but I think that's probably an underestimation of the amount of individuals, because
Mhm.
often this disease goes undiagnosed
Hmm.
Mhm.
for long periods of time. So I anticipate that we probably have more individuals out there in the state of Idaho. It's also the sixth leading cause of death in Idaho. Again, I think that's underreported, because there's a difference between dying with Alzheimer's and dying of Alzheimer's, right? And so
Okay.
often that doesn't end up on the death certificate. However, we know there's about 80,000 caregivers in Idaho. A quarter of them are considered what we call the sandwich generation, which means that they're the primary caregiver for their loved one with Alzheimer's, but they also have somebody under the age of 18 at home that they're also caring for. These are predominantly women. 66% of all caregivers are women. Think daughter-in-law. Daughter-in-laws are prime caregivers, and so the impact, and we can spout off again stats and all of that, and the amount of free caregiving that the state of Idaho gets from lay caregivers. But really, I think that the impact of Alzheimer's on Idaho is truly immeasurable.
And to piggyback, if I may, Karen, one of the things that we forget is of that roughly 80,000 people who are caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's or other dementia, keep in mind that nearly 3/4 of those individuals have their own chronic illnesses as well, and over 30% struggle with mood disorders like depression. Keeping in mind, it affects the whole family, right? And it is one of those things that is, can be a slow progression or a fast progression. It adds a tremendous amount of burden on the caretaker, if you will, to essentially be managing that individual, if you will, as well as their own life and perhaps other family members as well. So it's an area that, we're really concerned about, because we know that many times we've got to protect the health of that caregiver in order for this to continue to work, caring for the individual with Alzheimer's, making sure that that family, individual spouse, adult child who's caring for a parent, for example, is really attending to their own healthcare needs, particularly behavioral healthcare needs.
And that's, yes, very, very important. Take care of yourself first before you can help others. What's the expression? You can't pour from an empty cup, so you need to fill your own cup as well.
Right. Yeah.
And Kathy is asking in the comments, any advice on helping someone through a decline? If either one of you want to chime in there.
Yeah. So we actually have some volunteers out of the Twin Falls area that come from an improv background. And we have found that actually is really helpful, right? So as somebody, because often we try to pull that individual that has Alzheimer's and dementia into our world, right? Like, don't you remember we talked about this yesterday? We just did this, or no, that never happened, or that happened 3 years ago. Again, we're trying to get somebody that is in dementia into our world. That will never work. Not ever. So what we can do, though, is meet them where they're at. So for instance, we use that improv yes and, right? Like if we just kind of use that as a filter on how to communicate with somebody with Alzheimer's. So if they are saying, well, I got to go because I got to go to Spokane, I got to go up there for a business trip, you go, yeah, yep, that business trip is going to be long and hard. So you know what we need to do? We need to have lunch before we go to Spokane. Right. And then we use that to divert them to a behavior that they need to do again, because they haven't eaten lunch yet. Or yeah, Spokane is a long ways away. Do you know what we should do? We should probably have a shower and get dressed first. Right. So
kind of avoid the confrontation of combating.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I will say, there's a certain amount of Idaho spirit. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We can get through this together. And Alzheimer's is just is a different beast. And so what we find is that by the time people come to us to access our resources, our caregiver resources, our support groups, our care navigation, they are in crisis. The pot has been boiling for some time and they are in over their heads. And so one of the things that I would recommend anybody that is even remotely, involved in caregiving for a loved one is reach out to us sooner. Reach out to us, kind of what Dr. Khan was talking about. Take care of your own mental health. And we have resources to help people. We have, again, support groups, individuals that are going through the same thing. And so we would love to help individuals that, again, don't know where to go.
Yeah, that's such an important piece, Adrian. Thank you for really reiterating that. For the question that came to how to help a loved one through their decline, I had the same experience, by the way, with my father. I watched
I'm
him
sorry.
progress through a period of pretty profound dementia, and
Mhm.
one of the sort of recommendations that was given to me and to others as we cared for him was join their journey, because the tendency is you want to reorient. You want to say, oh no, it's not Tuesday, it's actually Saturday, or
Right.
it's not the winter, it's the summer, whatever. But the fact is to that person, it's whatever they think it is. And it really
Right.
doesn't at that point matter. Of course, you want to keep a couple key things in mind. Safety. You want to make sure that you've encouraged or had that individual go see their doctor. It may be appropriate that they're not driving anymore, right? I mean, that's one of the really tough things. We've recently had another elderly family member that we've had to manage giving up the driving. That was a big deal. For many of these folks, even though they are cognitively declining, there's other aspects of them that maybe appear to be fine, and maybe they don't recognize or understand why driving is not appropriate for them anymore, or there may be other ways to help manage that decline. Adrian mentioned instead of sort of engaging on whether or not they're going to take a trip, but let's take a shower or let's eat. It's really important to help that individual kind of stay with the routine, healthy eating, getting regular physical activity, making sure that their blood pressure is managed or blood sugar. We know that the same sorts of therapies and lifestyle practices that we recommend to prevent progression for diabetes or heart disease are the same kinds of things that we would recommend for someone with Alzheimer's or other dementia, making sure we're managing their overall health. And that includes social interaction. Karen mentioned, through the pandemic, we've been isolating quite a bit and whatnot. That has had a significant hit on people with
Mhm.
dementia. They've lost some of that normal exposure or social exchange, and it's so vitally important. The other piece that's important is making sure that they're hearing and they're seeing okay. We know that it's not unusual to have people have hearing decline over time. You'd be amazed once somebody's hearing again, actually they seem to perk up a little bit because they hadn't
Yeah.
been hearing anything or maybe mishearing things for a while. So
Mhm.
there are a number of ways that you can help physically and emotionally and socially support an individual who is progressing through dementia.
Yeah, another
Especially.
important reminder to get everything checked out and
Mhm.
stay up on your normal, medical
Mhm.
appointments and routines to make sure there's not something that's making this worse that doesn't have to be, right?
That's right.
And I like the yes and I feel like
Yes,
that
and yep.
concept can make the entire situation a lot better for the caregivers as well. Because instead of, the individual who may be living with Alzheimer's disease dementia may completely forget that conversation or the confrontation a short time later, but that can weigh on somebody with the frustration and we've been over this. Come on, like yes, and
Yep.
let's just have some lunch. It can
Yep.
make it so much easier.
Yeah.
So I hope
Yeah.
anyone watching out there um, so we're getting some more comments. Tina says, my mom had two different types of dementia. She passed in October and she
Wow.
started a private Facebook group just for Idaho caregivers. That's called
Mm.
Idaho Caregivers Unite. So this
Mm.
kind of goes on what Adrian was talking about. The resources that are out there, but having someone that's also gone through what you've gone through and to have someone to maybe vent to or get advice from. I imagine you've seen, Adrian, that be extremely beneficial for a lot of the caregivers in our area, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and again, admittedly, being the caregiver as a daughter is significantly different than being the caregiver as a spouse. It's just a different experience, right?
Mhm.
And so, what I have found, and to be very candid, being a caregiver is really hard. Is really, really hard. And so, you might have to say things out loud that might not be the most loving thing, right? And
Mhm.
so to have a group of peers or even one peer that understands that you share what I call the terrible shorthand of Alzheimer's can be so helpful, because if you turn around and say that to your children, that's a high risk conversation, right?
Yeah.
But you can turn around
Mhm.
and say things like that, and then again, not just to vent, but also to get practical skills, right?
Mhm.
So we heard of one. There was an individual in Idaho that tried to leave his backyard, or his back door into his backyard every day at 5 o'clock, like every day. And they tried everything in the sun. And so, somebody in a care or in a support group said, well, what did he used to do at 5 o'clock every day? He was going out to feed the cows
Oh,
every day at 5 o'clock, because that's what he used to do back in his 30s. I mean, he had regressed that far. And so what they would do is at about five, or about five, they'd be like, hey, Dad, we fed the cows today. Don't worry about it. And he was fine, right? I mean, it's that sharing of experiences that not only helps with just kind of the mental, like just the stress of it all, but can give like really practical tips and tricks, of somebody who's gone before. So
yeah.
yeah.
Now, Dr. Khan, I wanted you to maybe jump in and explain, from an outsider, there's a change in behavior that you can see. There's, maybe different actions or saying that they didn't used to do, but what is physically going on in somebody's body, in somebody's brain that's causing this? And what do we know? I'm sure there's a lot of research still ongoing, as we know, but what do we know?
Right. So it is absolutely a primary focus of research. And what we know is characteristically there can be some findings that are done on brain imaging. In fact, there's been a lot of research looking at, why and what those changes represent. What has been very interesting, though, and has been, again, popular in the news media, we've heard about a very expensive medication that was recently reviewed by the FDA, for example, to kind of tackle these brain changes, if we will, these proteins or these tangles that show up on imaging in some individuals. But what has been deemed, at least right now, is that may be consequential. Those tangles or those deposits didn't cause the dementia, but they may be a consequence. So we're kind of back to square one in terms of like what is actually causing the neurons, if you will, the cells that transmit, information in our brain, right, through chemical signals. Why are they dying off, right? So it is something that's of, again, primary research. There are some forms of dementia that are hereditary, associated with certain types of genes, if you will. That is an area of research, as well as sort of looking at even things like brain trauma. People who've had repeated brain trauma are more likely to go on and develop dementia, right? So kind of looking more at that causative piece. And then certain exposures to toxins may be linked to certain forms of dementia. So I wish I could say, yeah, we know exactly what's causing Alzheimer's and how to intervene or prevent it. We're learning more and more about it, and maybe have rethought about this assumption that the tangles or the deposits or the protein is causing it, but rather they're more consequential to another process that started before it. But having said that, what's important is if you notice a change from your loved one's baseline, that would be an important time to ask to have that individual see their doctor, right? This is a good opportunity, because what we know is that through clinical evaluation, individuals may have some lab tests drawn, there may be some imaging done, but then there's the opportunity to do a baseline cognitive function and monitor that over time. Typically, an individual progress from what we term mild cognitive impairment to more severe impairment over time. And you can kind of track that based on a couple simple tests that can be administered to that individual by their clinician.
Yeah, you don't want to put off something like that. If you notice something, just go ahead and get
No.
him into the doctor. Yeah.
Well, and also there's a thing called pseudo dementia. People who have depression sometimes present as if they may have signs of cognitive decline, and they're really depressed, right? When you treat the depression, suddenly they're cognitively a little bit, sharper again and whatnot. And so it's important to have that evaluation to rule out other causes that may mimic or look like dementia and have those treated, right? The other piece I did want to mention too is that, the poor judgment part, maybe something that the individual that lives with that loved one recognizes first. But I know, and I've worked with families where when kids who haven't seen the other parent for a while will come in and they'll say, "Hey, mom, I just noticed something weird about dad," or what have you. And what happens, I've seen, is sometimes you need other outside a look and say that's something that's different versus the person who's been living day in day out and maybe just not as aware that's happening, or even maybe picking up the pieces for the other individual. So there's some dynamics that may obscure the awareness that there might be some decline going on.
Yeah.
Well, I do want. Go ahead. Sorry, Adrienne.
We had an example, Dr. Khan, exactly of that. Some kids came over, and mom, who used to keep just an immaculate house. Again, anybody coming in from the outside would be like, "Oh, this is clean," but they were like, "It's not mom clean." And then they pointed that out to dad, and dad's like, "You know what? You're right." Like, again, not something that they saw every day, and that then led to a further conversation about what might be going on with mom. But it was that mom has always kept just the cleanest house, and now things are like piled up on the corners are dusty, and just like things like that. Again, could be an indication that something is amiss.
Another example that it shows up so differently in everyone. So it really relies on a loved one or a caregiver or a family member to know that person well and notice when something changes. So obviously there's a couple events coming up in the next couple of weeks, Adrienne, where everyone watching at home can get involved and actually play part in helping to make a donation that would then fund research. So let's talk about what's coming up in the next couple of weeks and how people at home can get involved.
Yeah, so our two flagship events are the Walk to End Alzheimer's. We just had our one in Idaho Falls last weekend, but coming up is Magic Valley. And then on October 2nd is our Treasure Valley Walk to End Alzheimer's. And one of the things that we talk about, again, is this disease is so isolating, and this is probably the one event a year that you can kind of come out and be with other people that are in your community. It would kind of come out of the shadows. I understand that there is a lot of concern out there so we have socially distanced. We have hand sanitation stations, masks available, gloves available, and this is 100% outside. And so there is plenty of room to be 6 feet away outside of your bubble. And people are encouraged to walk when they can. We don't even have a countdown, so people aren't congregated even outside. So we have taken some pretty deliberate measures to make sure that people are safe, but can still feel that community. If you are not comfortable, we still have an online option where you can walk where you're at. And so it's not too late if people want to sign up to start a team. If they just want to sign up as individuals, they just go to alz.org/walk and find your closest walk and sign on up.
Perfect. And I do, before we kind of get ready to wrap up here, I know you guys have some resources available on your website. I don't know if we're able to pull that up right now, but I believe it's alz.org, right, Adrienne?
Yes.
And if what kind of resources can people find there that maybe they're on their computer right now and they say, hey, maybe I need to look into that right now?
Yeah. So there's so much, so much. There's the Community Resource Finder if you are looking for a facility or respite care, etc. There's also something called the Caregiver Resource Center, which is basically all the things that you might need to become a caregiver or to help you through. There's caregiver stress tests, etc. There on our website. Most importantly, there is our 1-800 number. Again, it's right there I call this the 1-800 number that helps people. This is that it is at the end of that, our clinical master's level individuals, clinicians that are there 24/7. So I'm looking at the clock. It is 12:41. You could call them at 12:41 today. You could also call them at 12:41 in the morning. You could also call them at 12:41 in the morning on Christmas Day, right? So if your husband has mistaken your closet for the bathroom for the third time today, and you are just about to lose it, call our 1-800 number. There's somebody in over 30 languages on the other end of that line to help you. There's also something called Trial Match. So Dr. Khan talked about all of the different clinical trials that are going on. If you are somebody that has Alzheimer's and dementia in whatever stage that is and want to get involved in clinical trials, go to our Trial Match program and we can match you up to trials that you might be eligible for.
And the research so important. We need people to get involved. Yeah. Before we wrap up, Dr. Khan, is there anything, any closing remarks that you'd like to share?
Yeah, just to say that if you are living with Alzheimer's or dementia, or you're caring for someone with Alzheimer's or other dementia, check out resources available through your health plan, through the community. Make sure you're following up on what recommended treatments are there for you, not just for the dementia itself, but other things. Keeping in mind it's flu season coming up around the corner. Get your flu shot and your COVID shot. Haven't already done that. We did see. I will just say for your viewers, we did see an increase in the number of COVID deaths among people with dementia. And in part, people have this sort of confusion. They probably, maybe weren't washing their hands, weren't taking the physical distance, didn't know how to wear a mask, what the mask was for, So making sure folks have the protection through vaccine is going to be important, as well as other vaccine preventable illnesses. So thanks so much again. I appreciate being able to participate in our call today.
Of course. Thank you both so much for being part of this conversation. And of course, ALZ.org has a lot of resources out there. If you are watching right now and you maybe think of someone that comes to mind when you're hearing some of this conversation, that's a great place to start and kind of see what resources are out there for your loved one and for yourself. Because as we mentioned, the caregiver component is so incredibly important and it doesn't go unnoticed. I know a lot of caregivers out there may feel like what they're doing is not being appreciated, but it's important and we appreciate you out there. I know Adrian can speak for that as well. It's a very important job, even if it is thankless at times. So thank you both for being here and part of this conversation. And this video, once we end it, is going to stay up on our Facebook page. So if you do want to take a look back, maybe watch it with a loved one or bring up a certain conversation from this, you can kind of rewind and go back through this conversation and it will stay on our Facebook page. So as Tina's chiming in right now, remember self-care. That is also very important to remember. So we'll close on that. Thank you both for being with us. And thank you for those who are joining us live. And you can rewatch this on our Facebook page at any time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.